Calling into session the October 10th Planning Commission meeting. As always, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll be taking attendance. Commissioner Christian,
Present.
Commissioner Inga,
Here.
Commissioner Magai,
Here.
Vice Chair Heschler,
I'm here.
and Chair Keldorf.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Okay, any public communications? Come on up. Now is the time. If it's not on the agenda as a public hearing, now is your opportunity. Okay, seeing none, we'll close public communications. No written communications.
Nothing's received.
Thank you. And consent calendar, no items. So without further ado, we'll start with the Housing Element Community Meeting Staff Report. Hi, Paul.
Good evening, Chair Keldorf, members of the Commission, and members of the public who are watching or attending. Thank you for your time and for participating in the second annual Housing Community Meeting. As you know, in 2022, the City Council adopted our current housing element, which is the city's 8-year plan for meeting its housing needs. One of the major goals of the housing element is to communicate with residents about this plan, to report on our progress, receive input on how well we are doing and what we can improve. This meeting is part of our ongoing large outreach program, which I will touch on a little bit later in the presentation. But first, I would like to cover some housing element basics. The Commission has heard a part of this presentation before, so I apologize for being repetitive, but I just want to make sure that the public is aware of the basics as well. The housing element is part of the city's general plan. It is one of 10 different elements or chapters. The state of California requires every city to update its housing element every 8 years, and it sets strict parameters and requirements for the city's housing element. And these are the main contents of the housing element. The community profile section provides an assessment of the city's current and future housing needs, along with information on demographics, and that means the entire population and all the population groups. The other two sections, the housing resources and the housing plan, are the main focus of tonight's presentation. They are essentially our housing goals and all the programs that we have in place in order to meet those goals. So starting with the goal of facilitating the production of a minimum number of housing units, including units that are affordable to lower income households. A minimum number meaning the minimum sort of allocation that the state has provided. As I mentioned, every 8 years the state assesses the need for housing statewide, and it allocates that need among various regions and municipalities. And this table shows the state's allocation for El Segundo. So for the 8-year period from 2021 to 2029, the city needs to incentivize and or require developers to provide 521 new housing units, including 390 at affordable levels. The housing element anticipates meeting this goal in 3 ways, shown on the screen here. Regarding ADUs, accessory dwelling units, the housing element projects that approximately 120 ADUs will be permitted during this 8-year planning period. That averages to about 15 ADUs per year. So far to date, we have been exceeding this 15-unit average, and by the end of this September, we had issued 85 permits for ADUs in the last almost 4 years. So that's an average of about 21 ADUs per year. So there is a trend here, and we anticipate it to continue, and this will help us meet a portion of our RENA allocation. We issued 85 ADU permits up to today. The second area where we will meet our housing construction requirement is in approved projects. Before the City Council adopted the housing element in 2022, we had just approved the Pacific Coast Commons specific plan. So in the housing element, it listed that project as a way to partly meet our housing requirements, the RENA requirements. The Pacific Coast Commons project included 263 multifamily units, 32 of which reserved for households with lower incomes. This is just an image of the project itself. The developer has not applied for construction permits yet, but we anticipate that they will sometime during this 8-year period. And the affordable component in the development will sort of take a chunk out of that RENA requirement that we have. The third way the city anticipates meeting our RENA requirement is through the sites inventory and rezoning. The sites inventory is a list of properties in our housing element where construction is anticipated to occur, including properties rezoned to permit higher density residential development. Housing element program number 6 calls for rezoning certain areas to allow high density residential developments. And this is one of our major accomplishments this year. The City Council adopted rezoning in May of this year that established 2 new zoning overlays. The first overlay is a mixed-use overlay. It involves 4 specific sites, 3 among PCH and 1 more in the Smoky Hollow area. The density permitted in this overlay is 75 units per acre, and this has the potential to generate over 300 new units during our 8-year planning period. And we already have an active application to develop on one of these sites, the old Stick and Sign property. This here is a rendering of the proposed development, or what it would look like. Keep in mind that the plans have not been finalized, as we are still in the review process. But this project currently proposes 79 units, including some affordable units. And it makes use of the state density bonus law to secure some exceptions from development standards. The project will be subject to a site plan review discretionary application, so it will come before the Planning Commission, although the density bonus law kind of sets things in stone. If they provide a certain amount of affordable units, then they are sort of entitled already to some exceptions from standards. But the key point here is that our rezoning efforts and our code amendments are bearing fruit. We have interest from the market in developing on these specific sites in the MU overlay. And this in turn will help us meet some of our RENA goals. The second overlay is the housing overlay, which includes 5 sites that are currently zoned R3, where we've added the housing overlay to these sites. The density in this overlay is 65 units per acre, and this is anticipated to generate about 200 new units during the planning period, assuming that all these sites are developed to that maximum density, permitted density. So these 5 sites, in combination with the mixed-use overlay sites and all our other programs, are sufficient, based on our certified now housing element, to meet our RENA allocation. Another accomplishment from this past year was the comprehensive update of the downtown specific plan. This is also part of our housing element, program number 6. This was completed in May of this year, and the update expanded the city's downtown specific plan. it lifted the maximum density limits and relaxed several other standards, all of which are intended to incentivize new construction. And we anticipate approximately up to 300 new units to be developed over the next 20 years or so, the life of the specific plan. That was a quick summary on the number of units that are required and the areas where we expect these new units to be constructed. But the housing element contains 7 different programs. We just covered essentially one of them. All these programs are intended to encourage new construction, preserve existing housing in the city, and I will touch briefly on most of these programs in the next few slides. So programs number 1 and 2 are intended to conserve and improve existing housing stock, existing housing. In addition, in other words, to providing new housing to meet our housing needs, we need to make sure we maintain the housing stock that we currently have. The RSI program, the first program, it funds sound insulation improvements on residential properties in the north part of our residential district. And it is administered directly by LAWA, the city of Los Angeles, essentially. However, all the improvements have to go through our city's permit process. Now, LAWA initiated or restarted this program earlier this year and anticipates treating between 60 and 100 units every quarter for the next 5 years or so. And based on our permit records, we have so far, till the end of September, received 82 permit applications for treating properties in the city. Our code compliance program, officially called now the Neighborhood Preservation Program, operates under our department, Community Development, as 1 full-time employee, but we expect to hire a second part-time employee, maybe by the end of this year. Activity in this program has actually increased in the last couple of years. This year so far, we have had 148 new residential cases opened or inspections. And this is an increase compared to all of 2023 when we had 112 cases. So it was a substantial increase. And with the addition of a second neighborhood preservation officer, we expect that sort of trend to continue.
Can I ask you a question? Are those normally somebody's calling in for or a code enforcement violation, or it's just random inspection?
It is most of the time somebody calling in with a complaint, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do we know why there was an increase? Just
Because our neighborhood preservation officer is working hard and tracking things
doing
down.
his job.
I can speak to it a little bit. About 3 years ago, when I started, the neighborhood preservation or code compliance inspector was providing a lot of desk support in City Hall and struggled to actually get out to the field. We also just weren't receiving a lot of phone calls at the time, but over the last couple of years, we've really reprioritized their time, and they spend a lot more time in the field, and we have received an uptick in phone calls. We're responsive, or we're reactive only. We're not, all that proactive in terms, unless there's an extreme or immediate life safety issue, we are proactive. But otherwise, for one code compliance inspector, there's only enough hours in the day to handle the phone calls and complaints that we do receive. And so if you're familiar with the recent at least 2 budget cycles, council has budgeted for part-time positions, and so we're in the process of recruiting for the equivalent of 1 full-time part-time position, which would probably end up being 2 part-timers. And so we will have the opportunity to, 1, address complaints in a more timely basis, but also maybe be a little bit more proactive towards enforcement. And we can get into the weeds of the intent of some of these programs, but that's sort of why there's been an uptick.
And these tend to be renters that are calling, or these can be?
I don't think there's a safe assumption of one way or the other. It's a pretty fair distribution. Yeah.
Just was wondering if there's any correlation between ADU development and code compliance, or
Paul, by any chance, off the top of your head, do you recall, because we do report it during the annual report, sort of the distribution of code compliance cases?
The only thing I can think of related to ADUs, maybe if somebody started work without proper permits. So if we've had an uptick in ADU construction, and in some of those cases people started without permits, then we would get some more calls for that reason.
I'll say anecdotally, a lot of the calls we get are sort of minor nuisance abatement. It's people are complaining about their neighbors who are not trimming their hedges or their lawns or trash and debris, bulky items in the street. Those are the vast majority. Graffiti, those are the vast majority of the complaints that we're responding to. But there are several, to Paul's point, maybe somebody's doing work without permits or that type of nature as well.
All right. The programs that are highlighted here involve facilitating construction of new housing by removing barriers and adding incentives in the city's regulations. For example, in the case of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, we covered some of the numbers earlier, but regarding the ADU program itself, the state has placed a great emphasis on relaxing local regulations and promoting ADU construction in the last few years. So in response to state law, in 2018, we amended the municipal code to make it easier to apply for and get permits for ADU construction. In 2023, we updated those regulations again in response to state law to clarify certain provisions and make our code consistent with the state law. In fact, just in the last few days, I started going through the recent state legislation that was signed by the governor, and there is at least one new law that amends ADU regulations. So we will probably be coming to you in the next few months, maybe early 2025, with a set of amendments to our ADU regulations again. The conclusion here is that as a result of these amendments that we've been making, there has been an substantial increase in ADU activity since 2018. And we are definitely on track to meet our housing goal, element goal of 120 units by the end of 2029.
Go ahead. Paul, a quick question about that. In the element, there's a description describing the REAP program, the Regional Early Action Plan, and it's a grant program. And how does that work? What does that cover, and how do people apply for that?
I think it's primarily intended for local governments.
The city. Okay.
And I think it's geared towards planning efforts. If a city wants to update its regulations or do a study on how to change its regulations to incentivize a certain type of housing construction, they can apply for a grant for that purpose. If they need to make some amendments to their general plan or zoning, that's another thing that a city can apply for. Sort of to plan for housing, in other words, is what those
Gotcha.
grants
Have you guys
are for.
applied for some of that?
Same as the LEAP grant, which we took advantage of while we were developing the housing element.
Good.
Yeah, just to also answer that question, we have taken, and Paul alluded to the LEAP grant, we have also used the REAP grant for the inclusionary housing ordinance that came to the commission that then was converted to the, I don't know what we called it, but the ordinance where we looked at the increasing the density, the overlay zones, essentially. We've also participated in both LEAP and REAP grants that the South Bay COG has secured on a regional basis, and that's what's contributed to things. We're doing our own ADU calculator, but they've used those things to also advance initiatives to facilitate ADU production through a ADU calculator that the COG can use, and other strategies that cities can, beg, borrow, and steal from the regional effort as well.
Cool.
One question about the ADUs. They do not qualify in any way for any of the affordable or even moderate income units that we're responsible for.
They may. There's this potential, and in some cities they've made some efforts to track, their rent levels on ADUs that are permitted, so that the cities can actually claim those units as affordable the next time they have to report to the state. So.
Is there any incentive for a homeowner to try to make their ADU qualify as affordable?
I'm not aware of a specific law or program making that the case, but I am aware of some state lending and grant programs specifically for ADUs. So a property owner can technically pursue a grant or a loan opportunity from state agencies.
To be used towards construction?
Construction of an ADU,
Yeah.
yes.
If
So-
they restrict the income level or regardless?
No, I don't believe that restricting the income level is a requirement for those loan or grant programs. But indirectly, perhaps that will help with the rent levels if the cost of construction is, lowered or subsidized in a sense.
There is, I was looking at the ADU worksheet that the city has on its website, and there's a link to apply for that grant. And I clicked on it, it was like, it was used up in minutes, and,
It's gone.
First, oh yeah, it was gone. But they did say they were opening it up, and put your name in the list, so. They didn't explain any qualifications for it. I didn't know if it's just a first come, first serve, or what.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to share that there are, a couple years ago, there were several jurisdictions that adopted, and I don't know if they've changed since, but that adopted policies that waived permitting fees or offered accelerated permitting and some other incentives, local grant or loan programs that were either forgiving or no interest payback if they agreed to 50-year covenants for affordable, and I don't know what category of affordability, and I'm sure those things have changed over the last couple of years, but a lot of that was done in response to HCD's advocacy during the housing element cycle. I just haven't tracked where they've landed since then and if that's expanded, but there are several jurisdictions that have done that.
There has been a study of ADUs in the last few years regionally that identified that there is a good percentage of U's that have been constructed that are rented out at affordable levels. So sort of naturally, some ADUs, a percentage of them is affordable. Moving on to a couple more of these programs, just wanted to mention the program number 5, the urban lot split regulations. The city in 2022 amended the municipal code to allow for and establish standards for subdividing single-family residential properties. That was in response to a state law called SB 9, yes. This in particular allows individual lots in the R1 zone to be split into 2 and for 2 units to be placed on each of those 2 lots. So one single family lot with 1 unit could turn into 2 lots with 4 units in total.
Has anyone done that?
We have not received an application from anyone to take advantage of that, those new regulations yet.
Yeah, I remember we all remember oh my God, where there's going to be 10,000 units on Main Street. But yeah, I mean, it takes a lot to want to cut your lot in half and subdivide it. So.
I think we did add an affordability requirement.
That's correct.
Right,
That's
so,
right.
yeah.
Yes. So the city's regulations require at least one of the units on each of the lots to be affordable. Yeah.
So 2 of the 4.
Right. Yes. That was a brief description of program number 5. Program number 6, provision of adequate sites. This is the rezoning program that I described earlier, which identifies locations and rezoning to allow for higher density residential development. Program number 9, the El Segundo Municipal Code amendments, involves removing governmental constraints through code amendments. The program calls for amendments in 12 different topic areas. In 2023, we completed amendments in 8 of those areas. This year, we completed 3 more amendments, and that's 11 out of 12. And early next year, we should be coming back with the remaining required code amendment related to parking standards for residential uses. And if you recall, we recently had a study session about that topic. Many of these changes were requirements of state law. So we're very pleased that we're making fast progress on that. Okay, so moving on, the last 2 programs involve taking concrete actions to help provide housing opportunities to all population groups. Some of those actions include meetings with and presentations to community groups and stakeholders, such as tonight's meeting, preparing an annual housing element progress report, sharing that with the community, presenting it to you and the city council, sort of public forum, before we submit it to the state for review. Presentations before the Senior Housing Board, before the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Even our quarterly City Hall pop-up events, we go and we talk housing with people who attend, and we basically take it to the residential neighborhoods. And we engage in a lot of other outreach activities. We have website resources, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. And then these programs also place high importance on sort of our goals and accountability, meaning tracking our progress towards meeting our goals, holding ourselves accountable.
So Paul, I have a question on that. Can you elaborate a little more on what you do? Like when you speak to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, what do you talk about in terms of housing?
Sure.
Because I just remember when we approved the plan, one of the things that stood out to me was, because it had all the statistics of, by race and, by ethnicity and age and things like that. And we have a diversity problem here in El Segundo. I was pretty shocked to see the home ownership rates for, certain minority groups. So what do we do at those meetings when we, quote unquote, talk about housing?
Okay, so in most of those, in those meetings, the intent there is to try to reach and inform different parts of the community. So we treat the Senior Housing Board as sort of a representative of the senior community in the city in general. We treat the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee as sort of a body that kind of represents different groups and can give us feedback, So if we present to them what we are doing, and we will essentially give them more or less the same presentation, describe the housing element and the goals, and tell them how much progress we've made. So we want to hear from them, from their perspective, right? The housing board thinking as representatives of sort of that part of the community, telling us what do they think about our programs? What do they think about how well we're doing? What can we focus on in the future? So if the housing board tells us that, hey, we don't think we're placing enough of an emphasis on the senior community, can you consider doing this or another program? Then we will try to respond to that. So that's kind of the idea. I hope I'm helping answer the question.
That does. So to clarify, you don't go out and try to change the demographics, but you're providing information, soliciting feedback on how we can, from these specific groups, and how we can, I guess, encourage these groups to change those demographics then. To
help us,
Yeah.
From their perspective, to improve on what we're doing. There are programs that are addressing, sort of diversity and equity. So this, the last 2 programs that I talked about regarding fair housing, for instance, and community outreach, the idea is make people aware that don't know that there are these lending programs for ADUs, or grant programs for ADUs, or that there are, and I will cover that in a minute, fair housing programs at the local and at the state level that they can kind of look into and get assistance on. People who are renters, for instance, can contact the Housing Crisis Center, a nonprofit that is sort of works with the LA County in partnership and provides free services to people who are renters so they can understand their rights, you know. So by making this information available and known to more parts of the community, we are assisting all those groups to have better housing opportunities, for instance, and not to be discriminated. So that's kind of the intent behind this program, to reach as many people as we can. If we only present things to the Planning Commission, we're missing some folks who don't attend Planning Commission or don't watch the meeting. So we're trying to get out there and kind of spread this message as much as we can. Okay, so I mentioned website resources. So we developed 2 websites in the last few years. One was related to the housing element. So we developed that at the beginning of the process of developing the new housing element, going through the process. So we posted updates on how we were doing in developing the housing element, information on all the meetings we held and the different studies that we completed. Now that we've adopted the housing element, that same site provides updates on the implementation, you know, and we post our annual progress reports on that website. There's still a link there for people to sign up for updates on housing issues. There are still video links there for all the different meetings that we held previously and all the meetings that we are holding now. So this meeting, you know, we will take the video and post it on that page so that anybody that missed it can watch it there. And there's other related documents related to the housing element. There's another web page that we developed, Housing Division web page that links to the housing element page and also has some information regarding fair housing services, such as the Housing Rights Center that I mentioned earlier and other related links. There's information on affordable housing in general, information on lending and grant programs, as well as sort of listing of upcoming affordable housing projects. Right now that list is short. It has the Pacific Coast Commons on there, but we hope to expand that list so people are aware of where and when we'll have affordable housing constructed. And there's a lot of information on this page on ADUs, the regulations, as I mentioned, lending programs, and soon we will also have information, and Michael alluded to this, on permits. So we are in the process of developing an online calculator for fees. So if a property owner is thinking about building an ADU on their property, they can go on the website and simply answer a few simple questions and then get an estimate of all the city fees that will be involved. So they can kind of have more information to make a decision.
Does that work at any scale? Could a developer, could Pacific Coast Commons use it to figure out what their development impact fee would be as well?
Currently, that particular calculator is geared towards ADUs. I believe that we will be developing one for all types of residential projects soon. And I'm not 100% sure yet about commercial type of projects. But that's a good suggestion, something to consider and add to our web resources.
Yeah, I just remember as the junior person that used to have to go chase that down. It was,
Yes.
it was exhausting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that'll help out a lot. So that is the Housing Division webpage. I mentioned a little bit about tracking our progress and accountability, and I just wanted to mention that every year the State Department on Housing and Community Development requires every city to submit a report on housing element implementation progress. So we produce this report every year around March. We presented to the Planning Commission and to the City Council before we submitted. Our deadline to submit it is March 31st every year. And we post these progress reports on these websites that I've just described. In summary, the report has a status on the number of units that we are permitting every year, market rate and affordable. And it also provides a detailed description of our activity and implementation status on all our housing programs, all 11 programs that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So far to date, it looks like up to the end of September, we've issued permits for about 89 residential units. The vast majority of that are ADU permits in the last almost 4 years.
Paul, do you have an idea of the amount of ADU permits versus the ones that are actually getting built? I mean, do most people follow through once they do a permit?
I don't remember that off the top of my
I mean,
head
do
right
you have
now.
a sense? I would imagine if you're going to commit to it.
Generally, people will make the decision at the time of the permit is issued because they have to pay substantial fees in order to get a permit. So usually that is the major decision point. So once the permit is issued, generally speaking, the ADU will be constructed or the building will be constructed unless something unforeseen occurs. So I suspect that the vast majority of those permits will end up with a completed ADU in the end. And that completes kind of a description of our housing element and our progress to date. In the works, we have some more things to work on. I mentioned the ADU permit fee calculator. We should be able to get that going before the end of the year. We are also working on a pre-approved ADU plan program. This is actually a recent state requirement, so a lot of cities are developing these programs. The idea is that a city takes plans for an ADU that either it develops on its own, hires a consultant and drafts these plans, makes them available to the public on the city's website. That way, property owners don't have the same cost to develop plans from scratch, right? And then because the city's already reviewed these plans, the plan review process is shortened and gets a little less expensive. The other option is for the city to accept private architects and engineers to submit plans for pre-approval. And then again, there's benefits to property owners by selecting those plans if they like them, and then getting a more expedited and less costly permit process. We mentioned the residential parking requirement amendment that's coming up in the next few months, and you're probably aware that we're initiating a general plan land use element update that will also incorporate the mixed use or work-live component that we were considering in the Smoky Hollow area. And then we also, I didn't have it on this list, we are going to start working on a lot consolidation incentive program in the near future as well.
Do you have a timeline on the general plan land use element update? We've hired the team working on it.
It takes a while to go through that kind of process. It will most likely require extensive environmental review, so we're talking a good couple of years for that process to happen.
So the RFP is out. It's been out for about close to a month, and proposals are due in a week and a half or two. We're sort of aiming for selection of a consultant in December, January timeframe.
Thank you.
Is the Smoky Hollow live work part of that, or that's a separate study, separate amendment?
We will incorporate that in that process.
I see.
Yeah. So the idea is if there is any areas in the city where we consider making changes to residential uses or other uses, we will incorporate that as well in that. So
Yeah, I don't want to elaborate a little bit by incorporating it, because keep in mind, the general plan elements are very high level. They establish the policy direction, right? So they don't actually effectuate any changes until you implement the programs, much like the housing element was a high level policy direction. And now Paul's outlining all the things that we've done since the adoption to effectuate or implement the housing element's goals. And so the land use element will work very much the same. That discussion of live work units in Smoky Hollow is very likely to be part of that discussion. And then direction will be set in the land use element, which then staff will have to implement afterwards. So just to, I don't want us to think
Understood.
that by adopting the land use element, we've solved live work units, or housing in Smoky Hollow. But
Baby steps.
it'll likely be part of the conversation.
that is essentially my presentation. I'll be happy to take questions or comments.
I'm a little hesitant to ask this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if we exceed a certain quota of housing development.
You're asking my question.
Okay, sorry.
No, I
should've-
love it.
I should have
No.
gone down the line. Do we get credit in a future cycle?
I don't know if that is the case. I'll give you just a little short example. The Pacific Coast Commons project, if that is developed, it will meet our market rate quota. But I don't think that we will get credit for the future planning period for that. There will be a new requirement. The state will do an assessment in the next few years of how much housing we need overall statewide, and it will just allocate that need, region-wide and then to all the different cities.
Yeah, there will be an allotment of new units out, but I'll just tell you, at the APA conference a couple weekends ago, I sat in a session with representatives from HCD seeking feedback about the sixth cycle that we just finished. And at the end, one of the remarks was from somebody who, I don't remember which city she worked in, but they're a overperforming city. They have a lot of land, and they have a lot of development opportunity. They have no trouble building new housing at the moment, and they far exceed their RENA allocation. And the point that she made is that overperforming cities should get some kind of credit in this next cycle. HCD is taking a serious look at overhauling the process in the RENA allocation, but historically, I think we've all seen that hasn't resulted in much in the allocation and the coordination with SCAG, who establishes the distribution for our region. But it has come up several times. The comment was directly made to one of the program directors who directly oversees the implementation of the next RENA cycle at that session. I saw her write the note down. But again, HCD's also, their burden is that they are held to enforcing the legislation that gets passed. They don't always get a choice in the legislation that they have to implement. They are the enforcement branch, and they don't always get a choice over what they enforce. And historically, what's happened is, for underperforming cities, legislation will enact new laws that essentially penalize cities who underperform by forcing them to adopt even more lax rules or laws to help facilitate housing production even more in the next cycle. And sort of anecdotally, when you're a city that's not underperforming, or at least doing what you need to do, and if you are overperforming, the relationship with HCD is just that much easier. It's a little bit easier to navigate the process, but it's very unknown what the seventh cycle has in store for us, and it's very unknown what the legislation is going to pass between now and then regarding the RENA allocation.
If a city overperforms, does it take pressure off any other cities, or it's all based on
City by city, and that's also feedback that's given, is that these allocations and the distribution should really be more regional based, because the makeup of every city is significantly different, and where one city might provide greater job access. Another city might be a bedroom community, and they provide the population or the workforce.
Right.
And so the argument or the feedback that's been provided is that this really should be a bigger regional approach, and there should be greater thought to the distribution amongst the region. So we'll see how that gets
Yeah,
implemented.
some cities have more infill opportunities.
Right.
Some are landlocked, you
Right.
know, so
Kind of like this one.
not unlike.
I was just going to add, in the same vein, if I may, just as far as compliance and hammers that can be laid down, you may have read about the city of Norwalk that approved a moratorium on shelters and other kinds of supportive housing, which caught the attention of HCD in the state. As a result, the state decertified their housing element, which opened up Norwalk to the builder's remedy you may have heard of, which allows certain types of housing that still may not even comply, that is not compliant with, it can be denied for not complying with the general plan or zoning. So that it's an extreme,
Yeah, that was their penalty, right?
it's an extreme situation, and I think they're sort of addressing things, it seems like, but just an example of a extreme non-compliance.
So given that there is no incentive to overperform, I guess let me step back. So the current plan, it was with 300 something units. Is that what we're going for?
The allocation from
Yeah,
the
the
state
allocation.
for El Segundo was 521.
Got it. So given that there's no incentive then to overperform, as we go through this cycle and we're on track, would we then slow down development in order to not overperform as we approach a new cycle? Or how do we manage this actively as we go through the cycle?
There's probably not a mechanism to slow down. The state's intention is that we accelerate. And if you asked HCD or any of the legislators that authored those bills, they'd probably tell you that 520 some odd units is the bottom of the benchmark. You know, this is the bare minimum that we think you should be doing. You know, I think the philosophy is very different from that perspective. And if you kind of rewind to when we were looking at the RENA allocation and the rezoning, we actually had to go above and beyond, right? We had to rezone for greater capacity than the 500 some odd units because the likelihood of all of those sites being developed with 100% affordable units is pretty slim to none unless you find an affordable housing provider or developer and there's a subsidy and there's a lot of boxes that have to be checked that can't be checked today in El Segundo because of the cost of land. But we had to essentially overzone the density. And there's probably a very real scenario where even if we realized a significant portion of that development, because the incentive for a developer to develop affordable units is very slim, we still might not hit that 521 units consistent with the RENA numbers. We actually might build more units, and what will happen, we'll build more market rate units, and we'll far exceed that, and we won't hit our RENA numbers still. That's probably what's more likely to happen.
I think that's kind of where my mind is going. I'm wondering about the mix between market and low income. And I'm thinking about, because housing is scarce and expensive, especially so here in El Segundo, we seem to be headed towards a significant reliance on ADUs. And I wonder if that helps us reach those goals or not, if we have this over-reliance on ADUs. And as we kind of approach those limits, those development limits, if we find ourselves, if we end up with 300 ADUs, for example, would we be able to meet something like low income allocations? I'm not convinced that that would be the case.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I would suspect that in the next cycle, the state will not allow us to use ADUs to count towards the arena numbers.
Right.
Yeah. But the pressure to allow ADUs to be built will not be released.
No.
And so we were fortunate enough, at least in order to meet the numbers in this cycle, there was an allowance based on a ratio that the state provided, said, hey, most ADUs, based on our study and analysis, fall in these ranges. And so you can assume that some of these will fall into this range, but there's further studies that have come out from Berkeley over the last couple of years that half of ADUs that are built are not housing people, and the half that are not necessarily all being offered at the rates that they allowed us to assume for this housing cycle. So it's probably safe to say that we will not be able to do that in 2029.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I would say to your question about whether we would slow down development, I can't see that happening, but I do think that you can, if they're looking for a development agreement or a variance of some kind, then they have to demonstrate movement towards one of the community benefits, affordable housing being part of that. It enables us to be more stringent in that requirement.
Yeah, and that's what I was, in my mind, I'm like, as we get closer, right, we're like early in the cycle, the ADU thing seems to be like the runaway winner, right? If you're looking at, what kind of units are being developed and at speed, we get halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, it's like 3/4 ADUs, and we're not sure whether those are gonna, what would that do to the pressure on the remaining few years? Would developers in the last half of the cycle have this outsized pressure to come up with low cost units, and we missed an opportunity earlier in the cycle to avoid that pressure? And how do we think to manage that?
Well, I suspect market rate stuff is going to be kind of the easy
Oh, of
market.
course.
And so the missing market is the affordable stuff. And actually, I have a question. A couple of years ago, we looked at the Affordable Housing Fund, and Many Mansions was hired as a consultant. Can you give us an update on where that lives? Because I think we all sort of said, hey, they'll solve it for us. And so where's that?
Yeah, I happen to have an extra slide. I don't have all the information on the slide, but yeah, on the affordable housing strategy, I can give you a quick update, and I'm sure Michael can add some more detail. So the City Council adopted an affordable housing strategy last year, December 14th. That strategy had some priorities in mind. So 4 major priorities were codifying what they call a live or work preference for affordable housing. So that's something that we'll need to work on in the next couple of years. Some of the focus areas to incentivize housing would be in Smoky Hollow, the west side of PCH, East Imperial, and downtown. Those are some focus on downtown housing for young professionals was another sort of priority. And funding, with regard to funding, use our local affordable housing trust fund and try to find matching funds, or use that as matching funds for state grants or other sources of funding, so we can develop some affordable housing projects. The staff has followed up on that, and we've entered into a contract with a consultant over summer to assist us in sort of implementing the affordable housing strategy. We've had a kickoff meeting very recently, and I think that we now have sort of a timeline of things to do in the next year or so.
Yeah, I can go over some of that. So we've engaged with a firm by the name of RSG. They're very similar to Many Mansions, although Many Mansions they were a affordable housing provider and developer, very knowledgeable in the arena, but their bread and butter was as a facility management company or developer. RSG specializes in advising cities and clients, private development compliance in the production of policies and programs geared towards affordable housing. what we have them doing, the reason why, and the other reason why Many Mansions left or is no longer with us is the contract agreement that we had with Many Mansions was based on a premise that they would provide services in kind, essentially free, with the caveat that they received first right of refusal if the city were to surplus land. After that happened, the state passed new legislation called the Surplus Land Act, which required any public agency to go through a public process if they were going to surplus land and make the land available, open call to all and any nonprofit providers, which essentially rendered their contract pointless. So they just kind of disappeared from talking to us. There was really no point to that arrangement any longer. And so we closed that out and we've re-engaged with RSG, who has given us, and Paul summarized the wide breadth of things that the strategic plan covered. And in this first year of this engagement with RSG, the focus is really trying to identify ways to monetize that $5.3 million in the best way that we can, and find matching funds, utilizing REAP funds, as you mentioned earlier, to sort of, beef up that number as much as we can, leveraging it to utilize other government funding through federal or state programs. And then also explore how we might want to use that, whether it's partnering with a developer, whether it's subsidizing individual small projects. So the $5.3 million, I'll tell you on a scale, Long Beach just allocated almost 5.3. I think it was about $6 million in subsidy costs for 5 different projects, which resulted in like 63 some odd affordable units. And so if just to get an idea of what that accomplishes, and that was in this last year. So, construction costs keep going up. So we want to leverage it as much as we can to find additional monies, as well as find a continuous source of funding to continue infusing money into that fund. So some of the other things that they're focusing on this year is establishing the local housing trust fund. The COG established a trust fund amongst South Bay cities, but has since not been able to garner any support from other cities to actually do it. And so, we may explore establishing our own local housing trust fund, keep the dollars here in El Segundo. They're also looking at preparing El Segundo resident and employee or employer preferential affordable housing guidelines. So finding a mechanism to provide preferential selection to residents, people who work here, or people who, I think that the priority was work or live in the city, and adopting a policy that establishes that moving forward.
Is that legal? Can we do that?
It's tricky, but you can do it. In fact, the city of I wrote it down earlier. I think it was San Diego. A city in Southern California just passed a new ordinance. Santa Barbara. I'll have to ask you later to look at it with me. But I wanted to look. They just passed a new ordinance on it, and there's some additional relaxation of federal law that allows some local preference to happen. But it cannot be resident only. But if it's resident and people who work here, there's also an emphasis that I know that we've talked about in El Segundo about prioritizing folks who work at the Air Force Base and find some housing for the military personnel or personnel from the base in general. The other things that they're going to look at in this current year is long-term plans for Park Vista, because there's an opportunity there to get credit for any affordable units, which are officially not official at the moment. And so we're looking into that. And possible, if we get there, a possible NOFA, which is a notice of funding availability. So if we do identify what we want to do with that $5.3 million and we have other funds that we can put that with, we can release a notice of funding availability and look to partner with a housing provider or affordable housing developer.
Gotcha. And a reminder, the 5.3 was a in lieu fee that DR Horton paid. And has any other developer paid into that fund, or that's still just sitting in a trust fund
That's
somewhere,
right.
bank account
It's
somewhere?
just sitting, hanging out.
Just sitting, not making money.
Yeah.
If this, is it legal if the city owns the land to restrict it to city employees? Like,
Oh, that's a good question, like corporate housing. If the city owns the land and builds its own, and employees of the city or
I
employees?
think it would have to be.
Yeah, I mean, true
So
corporate
I-
housing,
Yeah.
school districts do it, military bases do it, but it would be city employees, City of El Segundo city employees
Yeah, it
probably
would
to
only fit
qualify.
that bucket,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
Well, that'd be good for all you guys.
I'd love to shorten my commute. yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, Paul. It's always nice to see what we have coming ahead, but it's also nice to look back. I think we approve these things individually, so it's nice to look back in the broader context and see how it fits into the entire plan. So thank you for that. But I apologize, I do have to leave. But I'm glad we have a full roster today, so our quorum is still intact. So thank you, everyone.
Kevin,
Thanks, Kevin.
thank you.
Hope everything's okay. Right.
Yeah. Do you have any question? More
Well,
questions?
just, under the umbrella of housing and trying to meet our RETA numbers, can you give us an update on PCC? I mean, does it feel like it's on track? Has it stalled?
Yeah, I checked in with the developer before completing my presentation. They said they're more or less in the same situation as they've been the last couple of years. They're just waiting and watching the market and the financing world, and before they can make a commitment.
Gotcha.
I would love to know what that rate needs to become for them
Yeah.
to. Do we have the same brain today? Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Where does it have to go?
Yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, thank you.
But we do have some interest in new development. So, I mentioned that project at the Stickenstein site. We were having some preliminary conversations about the property across the street, the Carl's Jr. property. Nothing formal yet. And you know that there is another project, large project that's kind of in process at the Grand in Kansas. So there is activity in residential. I'm not sure who will pull the trigger, what will be approved, but there's some interest. And I think that the rezoning that we completed made a big difference on some of these projects working out, or at least getting closer.
I'm realizing as I'm asking these questions are questions I should have asked you before, so you actually had this information. But do we know who owns Wiley Park? Since it's in our housing element?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have communicated with the property owner. We did when we were presenting or preparing the housing element. The property's been listed for sale several times to no avail. There are underlying easements restricting development on that property currently, imposed by the city actually from several decades ago, related to parking and the requirement to keep it as a park until they unwind the parking demand in that area from Wiley Labs itself. Well, we've had a tough time actually getting a hold of the owner lately.
It is one of the 9 sites identified in the housing element.
Yeah, it's on the
what,
corner of
Franklin
Franklin and Maryland.
and
It's in
Maryland.
Park. It's,
Yeah. Tiny park.
yeah, Maryland and Franklin.
Maryland.
Yeah.
thank you.
It's Smoky Hollow-ish, right? Yeah. Yeah. Smoky Hollow.
It is.
And that is just illustrative, right? I mean, it's
No,
not
that's
like,
Stickenstein,
I know,
right?
I know, but that's
Here we
not.
go.
Yeah, well, we should be careful about the discussion on it,
Yeah,
obviously not
yeah.
considering that
Okay.
tonight. It is preliminary, it's something that they're working
it-
on, but it is conceptual, and when you
Conceptual,
spend
that
that
was the
amount of
word I
time
was
and
looking
money,
for,
you know,
conceptual.
you can see what they're aiming for.
Wow.
Deep sigh. Yeah, so it's the cluster of smaller parcels on Franklin. Oh, okay.
There's an open parking lot across the street, and then there's the park area.
Okay, thank you. If no other questions for staff, then I do believe it's a public hearing, so we'll thank Paul and invite any members of the public to come on up. No? Okay, wanted to make sure we had the opportunity. Okay, so we will close public hearing, and then this is just a receive and file, right? Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Nothing to be done. Thank you, though. Good detail. Okay. No new business. Any report from the Community Development Director?
None at this time, except for I think we have something and another announcement.
Yes,
Thank you. You guys are.
from the department, from community development, we'd like to extend
Happy birthday.
a happy birthday
This is what you do when you
to
show us
our
remote
chair.
work. Last planning commission meeting. Thank you. Thank you all.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you
That's
very
our
much.
announcement.
Nowhere else I'd rather be. City Attorney's Office.
Happy birthday. Nothing else at this time.
Thank you. Okay. Planning Commissioner comments.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Mark?
I thought we were gonna sing. We talked about this before.
You can use your comment to sing.
Before
That's
the,
fine.
I need harmonizers, so hopefully enjoy your day.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the El Segundo public for showing up tonight at the Housing Element. So John Pickhaver, thank you for being here.
Yes.
And yeah, no, it's tonight was a good report. So thank you, Paul, and thank you, staff, for taking us through that. It's it was a nice reminder of all the stuff that we've gone through over the last couple of years. So thank you for keeping it moving.
Yes. I concur. That is a huge undertaking. And can I say that what Michael told me that we got kind of a gold star? Yeah.
From the state? Oh, good. Nice.
From HCD.
Yeah.
Ish, right?
Just that we maintain good relations with HCD.
Nice work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is good work. That will come in handy. Okay, thank you all so much. We are adjourned then until October 24th.
Whose birthday is it then?